This is the Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane, and this is where I usually shoot the men's A-League football. Every so often, I'm able to get up into the stand and take a nice kind of wide panoramic shot of the stadium. I normally do it pretty much every match, but I generally kind of move around and try and get different angles, different shots. So this is using the 15 to 35mm lens, extremely wide, but there are occasions where I feel like I just want to go a little bit wider, and that is when I use the panoramic technique, blending those sequential shots together to create a much bigger image in terms of pixels, but a much wider image as well. So this is an example of one of those kind of ultra-wide panoramic images created from sequential files. This is another example, and I'm standing in pretty much the same position where I was for a standard photo, but you can see how much wider I've managed to get. I've managed to get more of the seating in, I've managed to get more of the roof in, and this has been obviously edited as well, but generally it just feels like I've got more of the stadium in shot. And this is another example of this technique. This is Wembley Stadium. This is, I think it's a 90,000 seater stadium. So this stadium is absolutely huge, and you kind of appreciate the sheer size and scale of this stadium from this shot. This is probably about a couple of hours before kickoff, so the stadium does look kind of empty. And it's not perfect. There's a few issues in the corner where the images haven't quite stitched together properly, but you'll be forgiven for that. But the fact that I'm able to get most of the roof in and pretty much all the seating apart from what's behind me is really quite impressive. And it's one of the reasons why I like to use this technique, is being able to get as much of my surroundings in shot as possible, as opposed to just taking just a standard photo with that 15mm wide field of view. And here's another shot that I really love. This is the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in London. Again, this is probably about an hour, maybe an hour and a half before kickoff. You can see the crowd gradually building up. It wasn't quite a sellout. It's about 45,000 people in a 60,000 seater stadium. So I think the upper tiers weren't being used, but still, you really get the impression of the size and scale of the stadium. I've managed to get most of the roof in shot and most of the seating around me apart from what's behind me. So really, really pleased with this shot. And I appreciate not everyone likes this type of thing. They prefer to just take a single standard shot with the wide angle lens that they have. I've got the 15mm. This was taking 15mm sequential shots to create this super wide. And it's a bit kind of warpy and distorted, but it just gives you that full appreciation of the sheer size and scale of the stadium that we're working in. But of course, this type of imagery can be achieved using your smartphone panoramic mode for interior shots and also for the stadium shots I'm taking here. I'm quite often photographing professional sports and like to take nice super wide shots at the stadium. The panoramic mode on the iPhone 16 Pro Max allows me to achieve super wide and detailed panoramic photos. However, there are many occasions where there are issues with the exposure settings, the composition, and the subjects within the photo. Here is a great example. When I was panning across the stadium, the fans in the foreground were moving and waving flags, which led to a highly distorted end result. Of course, I can simply retake the panoramic as many times as I want. By using the mirrorless R5 camera and the RF 15 to 35mm lens, I have far more control over the composition, even when shooting sequentially. I also have far more depth of color and dynamic range to play with when in post-production. In this comparison with the iPhone 16 Pro Max, you can see how much better the R5 and 15 to 35mm lens has handled the shadows and highlights, and also the tonal range of the image. The sun in the top left has a starburst effect because I was able to control the aperture of the camera. With the iPhone, it's more of a smudge on the screen with a light streak going through it. I'm able to apply post-processing to the raw files with the image taken with the Canon R5 to produce a bright and well-composed image. The iPhone image is still really good, but for professional results, I would always use the camera. So I'm just going to run through the process and the technique of doing this. So I'm just going to adjust some of the settings on the camera. I'm normally shooting at f11 or f8, so I'm going to go with f8 for this one. I'm going to bring the shutter speed down to something that's still going to give me a sharp, clean image. So I'm going to go for about 1/250th of a second. At the moment, it's giving me sort of ISO around sort of 200 to 250. I'm simply going to move the camera into portrait mode and take a series of sequential photographs, one after another, and making sure that they actually overlap. So normally a 50% overlap, just to allow the software to be able to stitch stitch those images together. And I'm also going to just go around and take a few kind of standard photographs at 15mm, which is the widest that lens can go. This is all being done handheld with the image stabilization system turned on. And when it comes to focusing, I'm generally trying to find a midway point between the foreground and the background. So I'm generally normally focusing on the pitch, or on the pitch but a little bit closer towards me, because I'm shooting at kind of f8 or maybe even f11, so it's got a very, very deep depth of field. So I'm now going to bring all of these files into Camera Raw, and this includes a lot of the kind of standard shots that I took, and I'm just going to go through them gradually, and I'm just going to delete the ones that I don't need, because a lot of them are very similar, so I don't actually need all of these files. Okay, so now we get to the portrait orientation, and you can see that I'm just going to scan through, because I shoot in burst mode. Some of these photographs are kind of duplicated, so I just want to get rid of images that are the same. You only need a 50% overlap with those portrait images. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of those portrait photographs, and I'm just going to right click and I'm going to select merge to panorama. And this is the end result. And great thing is I've got this boundary warp slider, which I'm going to push to 100. I'm going to apply the auto settings. I'm going to see what cylindrical looks like. It looks really distorted and warped, but I'm generally happy with spherical with the boundary warp at 100. So I'm going to merge that down, just going to save it in my folder that I've pre-prepared. And now I have a DNG file. So I can now go back and I can actually just delete all of these sort of portrait files. I just don't need them anymore. So I can just delete them. So I'm just going to run this process again. And because I actually shot 2 panoramics while I was in the stadium. So we're going to run this process again with the other panoramic that I shot, just to have a look and see how that appears. So you can see here, let's move the boundary warp slider to 100. Probably not quite as good as the other one. More to do with my position in the stadium. Because I wasn't quite right in the corner, I've ended up with a lot more of the right-hand side as opposed to the left-hand side. So I think the first one that was produced was a lot more effective, and it's purely because of my positioning in the stadium as opposed to this particular shot where I've just got more of the right-hand side. So, I mean, I'll still use it, but your initial positioning in the stadium is really important. You kind of have to position yourself right in the corner to be able to get a really, really nice panoramic. So I'm just going to apply some edits to this image. I'm just going to crop in slightly. I got so much of the stadium in shot. I'm just going to do a bit of cropping. I'm just going to pull some of that right hand side in a little bit, because we don't need to see so much of that. And just going to straighten the image up a little bit, and I'm just going to adjust some of the blacks and also reduce some of the shadows and just bring some of the whites and the highlights down. Just trying to get a good balance between the whites and blacks. And I think overall, it's not a bad image. Of course, this time of the day, a lot of the time, the stadium is casting a shadow over the pitch, and which is not amazing. But the great thing about having such a wide dynamic range shooting RAW is that we're able to adjust the whites and the blacks and then bring down some of the shadows and do this sort of post-production editing. I'm just going to go back to the first panoramic shot that I took, and I'm just going to make a few adjustments again, cropping in. So just trying to get the pitch slightly more central. The nice thing about this image is the shadow on the pitch isn't quite as profound as the other panoramic image, and I'm able to really tone down some of the whites here as well and get a slightly nicer balance between whites and blacks. So I'm just going to adjust some of the shadows here and maybe just beef up the saturation a little bit, and just a few more minor adjustments here, just trying to get the balance right. I want to have the image as kind of bright as possible, but at the same time I want it to look, natural as well. Okay, so I think we're happy with that. So I'm just going to save these images down into the folder that I pre-prepared. So I'm now saving from a DNG, which is a RAW file, down to a JPEG. So if I want to make any further edits, I'm able to revert back to the DNG file. So that's my master file. So from that, I'm able to save a JPEG. So here I'm just going to show you a quick comparison between these, the shot of the standard 15mm field of view to that of the panoramic field. And as you can see, I'm just getting so much more of that roof in, getting more of the stand, more of the seating. It just gives you another perspective and another sort of interesting field of view. It gives you a greater appreciation of the stadium. It just allows you to shoot and have more of your surroundings in shot. So the reason why I like that type of photography, it's not for everyone. It's, a lot of people look at it and go, oh, it's a bit warpy and a bit distorted, but we're just trying to create something that's a little bit unusual and a little bit different. And it's Obviously a lot more work. Personally, I don't think it takes that much time to produce these images, and I think the end results are probably worth it. Thanks so much for watching. Please give it a like, give it a share, and subscribe for more videos.